David Min is an American attorney, professor, and politician. He has become the senator for California 37th Senate District, which includes portions of Orange County since 2020. Senator Min serves as parliamentarian for the California Asian and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus, which developed and passed the 2021 API Equity Budget, which was the first initiative of its kind around the country. We're happy to have this opportunity to talk with Senator Min about being an American public servant.
There's a lot of, I think, responsibility and expectation, right? There's not very many Asian Americans in politics. Right now in the California Senate, there's only two of us. Dr. Richard Pan, who's Chinese American, and myself, I'm Korean American. And Dr. Pan actually terms out this year, so it's very possible that I might be the only Asian American in the state Senate next year. And that means I have a lot of responsibility to not only represent the 1.1 million people in my district, I have another responsibility of trying to represent the values and interests of Asian Americans around the state. Because if I don't do that, who's going to do that? If I don't stand up against anti-Asian hate and try to push for the API equity budget, who's going to do it? So it creates a lot of expectations, but I'm proud to serve that role. I'm excited to serve that role. When I was campaigning, my district's only about 20% API. So I can't just win by appealing to APIs, I have to appeal to everybody. And I wasn't campaigning on an Asian-centric campaign, but since taking office, of course, our Asian communities, our API communities have faced so much adversity because of COVID, because of anti-Asian hate, because of people pulling back from Asian small businesses. I've had a lot of work to do to try to represent those communities. But it's also very exciting. I know a lot of young people told me they see me as a role model. That's such an honor. I think it's really important to have people who look like you up there. When Barack Obama was elected president, how many African Americans for the first time, little kids, boys and girls, thought I could be president someday. And I think unless we have people in those roles in sports, in entertainment, in law, in medicine, and yes, in politics, our young ones, like our kids, are not going to be able to look ahead and say, hey, that's who I want to be. That's what I want to be when I grow up. And, it's a very different time for my kids than when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid, there were almost no Asians in my school for a while. And being Asian was something, kids made fun of. I got made fun of all the time in different ways, sometimes more aggressive, sometimes more subtle. But certainly we all, as Asian Americans growing up in this country, experience discrimination. But my kids, think being Asian is really cool, and I want to keep that excitement in them. To do that, we have to get past this anti-Asian hate, and we have to continue showing we belong here. This is our space. We belong in politics. We belong in sports. We belong in all these spaces where you haven't seen a lot of Asian Americans. I'm the son of Korean immigrants. My story is probably very familiar to a lot of your viewers and audience. My parents came over after the quotas were lifted in 1965. They came over to study in 1971 for their graduate studies. They're just going to stay here for a few years, get their PhDs, and go back. They ended up getting married, having me, their firstborn son, in Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I was born. Then my brother in Ithaca, New York, a few years later. And then they were trying to figure out where to end up. My dad told me the story, when I was just about 3 years old. He was interviewing, and actually we could have ended up in Iowa or Michigan. He was interviewing mostly at universities, but he had a private sector job offer from Lockheed, the aerospace company. So he was a mechanical engineering PhD. And so he came out to California to interview. After the interview, he decided, I'm going to drive to the beach. Why? I'm in California, I have to do that. He bought himself a fish sandwich from a vendor, took off his shoes and socks, and just walked along the beach in the water while eating his fish sandwich. And after that, who wants to not live in California? And that was he's like, we're moving to California. This is where I'm going to be. And so my whole life, as long as I can remember, I was in California. I was born in another part of the United States, but that's all I remember is California. But, like all Korean Americans, or all Asian Americans, I think I have gratitude for what this country's offered. My parents tell me stories about how they grew up during the Korean War and its aftermath. And just like what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, that war was devastating for the Korean community. They were in incredible poverty. It was truly a third world country. And while we look at Korea today, just like we look at China and say these are immense, powerful economies that are really cutting edge in a lot of ways. That was not the perception in the 50s and 60s when they grew up. And so, they came to this country, they decided to stay, and this country's they've given them everything. I mean, we are the American dream. My brother's a Stanford-educated doctor. I'm a Harvard-educated lawyer. And while I know not all Asian Americans are high performing, but like we could not have had this level of success in our family without all of the things that America offers. And I think that right now those values are really under attack. There are a lot of people who want to see us as Asian Americans, as my parents being immigrants, as new Americans, so to speak. They feel like we don't belong here, and I think we see that with anti-Asian hate. We see it in a lot of the nativist sentiments that are saying, we want to go back to the old America. And those are not the values that I think this country stands for. I'm an Eagle Scout. I went through the whole Boy Scouts program, and I was always taught this country is about bringing people in. It's about accepting people from other countries. It's about giving them opportunities. And it's this idea of inclusivity and opportunity. And to me, that's what America stands for. And that is very different from the vision of divisiveness and hate and exclusion that we're seeing, right now in so many people in America. And so I think we have to fight, because Asian Americans belong here. This is our country. This is not just your country. We're all immigrants here. And the fact that your grandparents came over earlier than my parents did doesn't mean I'm any less American than you. And so we have to, as Asian Americans, fight and tell people, you are not getting rid of us. We're here and we're just as American as you, and you have no damn right to tell us we don't belong here, no damn right to go out and try to intimidate us in public spaces. I think it was after the 2016 elections when I saw a lot of politicians going after different communities. I remember the Muslim ban targeting Muslims, saying you can't come to this country, you can't travel into this country. I remember a lot of people being targeted. And I just felt this is not right. This is not what America stands for. And I remember being out there at political rallies, and I'd never done anything like that before. I'd always been quiet, and I figured my role is in the background as a policy person. My goal in life was to become Secretary of the Treasury, not to be a politician. But I think that election and what it brought out in America really made me think, okay, what am I doing with my life, and how can I affect change? And a lot of my work had been about trying to make good policy in this country. But I think right now what we need are politicians that are willing to fight for our values. And I think that was the realization in me, is I can complain about the way that our government works and why they're not doing better things, or I can get involved in government and try to actually make the change I want to see. And so that was really my goal. Like I kind of was pushed into it in a lot of ways. Like I think people saw my background and resume and said, you'd be a perfect candidate. And look, it's not a great job. I mean, we have to call people and ask them for money. We have to show up, and people, we're famous, but like nobody likes us. So like that's not like I'm get to be like Ken Jeong is a celebrity everybody loves. So I got to meet Ken Jeong the other day. He's famous, really famous, and everyone loves him, right? Republicans, Democrats, there's no divisiveness. Politicians, half the population hates you, maybe more, and you're famous, but you're not rich, and so it's a hard task. But I think if we don't take over our government, we have no one to blame for ourselves. I prefer the term public servant. And look, I don't want to belabor this point, but I could be doing my old job. I could be a lawyer. I could be a law professor. These are prestigious jobs that I could be making a lot more money at. Even a law professor makes a lot more than I currently make.
Really?
Yeah, I took a huge pay cut to get my current position. But again, we have the chance to really shape the course of history. And I think for me, particularly at this time, that was the most important factor, is like we can do so much good. And this job, I can do so much good. And I think that's the part that's exciting for me. That's the number one influence for me. And you can't help but think about your upbringing. What are the values you're brought with, right? So It's on my website, but like one of the core things I believe in is, how do we make the world better for the next generation? So there's a quote on my website: "A civilization is great when its elders plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in." And I think we in this country got away from that sentiment of long-termism, of how can we make the world better for the future generations. And that to me is like how I think of my parents when they came to this country and made sacrifices for me. And it's that ethos that I want to think about, and how can we invest in the future? How can we make those sacrifices for future generations? couple weeks ago, we also had the 30th anniversary of Sa-igu, which is 429, the LA riots in Korean culture. So Sa-igu literally means in Korean 429, the date 429, which was the April 29th was the day we had the LA riots in 1992. And that was a very traumatic event for Korean Americans. And so it's funny because, I had Sa-igu celebrations or commemorations. It was a big deal for my community. And then we started to do all these different Asian Heritage Month celebrations as well. And I think the lessons are very similar, which is one of the things the Korean community learned after those riots is a lesson they're remembering again today, that you can't just be siloed. As a lot of Asian Americans are taught, let's put our head down, do your work, be successful, and don't, worry about what else is going on, right? And I think that was the mindset of Korean Americans before the LA riots, and I think they then realized we have to engage with our communities. We have to be politically engaged. We have to try to build bridges with other communities, including the African American community, because if we don't, we're an island, and we're a pretty small island, and we really could get hurt. And so we do need to make sure that we're not just Koreans, but we're also Americans. And I think Asians are learning that lesson too, and many of us knew this, but I think we really need to do a lot to engage with other communities, with political communities, with different faith communities, with different ethnic communities. We have to do what we can to try to make sure that as Asian Americans, we are like fully engaged with everybody else. And being politically active is so important too, because right now we're seeing the importance of our API representation and trying to do things to keep our API population safe. In a time when violence against APIs is so high, trying to do more outreach. So my view right now on Asian hate is in the short term, we need to make it unacceptable again for anybody to voice or act on any anti-Asian sentiment. No one should feel like it's okay to go out there and say something racist or do something racist against Asian Americans. They need to feel that there's going to be immediate consequences, jail, losing your job, having people come and condemn you. That's the type of sentiment we need now. Bottle it up. But in the long run, we also need to heal the hearts so that people don't feel anti-Asian hate. And that's going to require education and outreach. And that's one of the reasons I thought our API equity budget was so important. We got $166.5 million for Asian community organizations, for medical clinics, for ethnic studies development programs, for outreach, for Asian ethnic media. This is going to pay off so much more. But I think it's important to start building those bridges and getting into people's hearts. We're as American as you, we're your neighbors, we're your doctors, we're your students, and we're here with you, we stand with you. That's all important. And it's also important symbolically another way, because I think this is the first time any state or federal government in the United States had ever passed anything like this. And there's a saying in politics, our budgets are a reflection of our values. And if that's true, Asians were not valued until last year in California. And so this was the first time that Asian Americans were valued enough that we made an investment in Asian American priorities. And we hope that this is not the first and only investment, that this is the first of many, many investments. We're looking for more investments this year, and we want to keep pushing forward because other communities get things for their community. We as Asian Americans, we need to push. We're here. We need to exercise political power. So these are some of the lessons I think we've learned. But we just need to keep progressing forward. I think we've achieved so many great things. I look around. I was at a Gold House event last night for Asian Heritage Month, and it was just amazing to see all the different people that were leaders in their fields. But there's not enough of us still, and we need to keep pushing. We need to work together. Okay. Pan-ethnic, so Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Indian, Pakistani. We all have to work together to lift each other up, because here, we're Asian Americans, and we're not going to get anywhere without helping each other.